This is the Contax T2. It has a multi-coated Carl Zeiss f2.8 lens, and it fits in your pocket. It also costs around $1,000, multiple times more expensive than your typical 35mm point and shoot, and it's almost 30 years old. Now, some people believe that this camera is only expensive because of the celebrity status that it's achieved over the last decade. They say that it's just simply overpriced. But as somebody who has shot thousands of photos on it on multiple continents over the last 5 years, I have a different perspective. That this is actually one of the most misunderstood cameras of our time, and that there's something special about it that is the real reason why it's so expensive. So in this video, we're gonna explore the Contax T2, why it's received a cult-like following, the things that make it so special, and determine if it's really worth the hefty price tag. Upon its release in 1990, the Contax T2 wasn't that popular. The price was $900, which adjusted for inflation today is around 2,000 USD. This made it significantly more expensive than the cheaper alternatives that were flooding into the market by brands like Canon, Nikon, Olympus, etc. People simply weren't buying fancy $2,000 equivalent point and shoots. They were buying basic ones for family snapshots. Or if they really took their photos seriously, they were getting a proper SLR. So the T2's talents were largely unappreciated and hidden until one day,
You brought your camera.
Yes, I did.
This is the one you use?
That was my little contact.
And that's how you take that beautiful photo?
Seemingly overnight, the T2 achieved celebrity status and became synonymous with the renewed hype around film photography and the cultural cachet that came with being cool and edgy and trendy. Even though so many people were buying it just simply for the hype or to align themselves with celebrities, this was when the wave of recognition that the T2 deserved started to pick up. But if it's not the cultural cachet that makes this camera special, then what does? So let's just do a brief tour of the camera. This is obviously my Contax in gray. The front of the camera is very simple. You see we've just got our flash, the light meter, the viewfinder, and the lens. And the lens nicely retracts into the camera. It's normally a little snappier than that. I think my battery is dying. If we flip the camera so that you can see the top of it, you can see that right here we actually have an aperture ring where we can choose our aperture from f2.8 up to 16. The green on the f2.8 means that the camera is actually in auto, which is where I leave it most of the time. And then to the left of that, we have a red eye flash, so when it flashes twice, and then we have a single flash. I usually leave it on f2.8, which is auto. As you can see, because f2.8 is green and it is the automatic setting, you can't actually force this camera to shoot in f2.8. You can only get it to shoot in f2.8 when it's in auto and the camera deems that that is the setting that it wants to shoot at. So slightly annoying, but that's really my only gripe with this camera. Here, we've got our on, off, and focus dial. So we can turn it off, turn it back on, and then if we keep twisting, so you see on is actually green, autofocus. If we keep twisting it, now we're in manual focus, and we have the ability to go to 0.7 meters all the way out to infinity. I could imagine it being useful if you were shooting a lot of street photography, but the autofocus works just fine for my uses. Then next to that, we've got the self-timer function, which is very easy to just flip on and off. Got the shutter button, obviously. We've got the exposure indicator telling us we're on frame 19. But the most important part of the camera to me is actually this knob right here. And this is the exposure compensation dial. So if I show you the back of the camera, right now I'm at 0 green, which is just a neutral exposure. We're not overexposing, we're not underexposing. But if I twist it, I can choose to have it overexposed by 0.5 of a stop, a full stop, 1.5 stops, 2 stops. Or we can go all the way down to -2 stops. But to understand why any of that is special, perhaps we should take a look at a more standard 35mm point and shoot. So this is just your run-of-the-mill Minolta, very plastic. You can hear it. Doesn't take super great photos, but it takes photos. About as big as the Contax, but nothing particularly remarkable. There are a total of 1 button on this thing. and it is the shutter button. There's a dial or kind of a lever at the front to control whether or not the flash fires, but that's it. That is all of the control that you have, which is great because, you know, it's nice and simple. All I want to do is take a photo, I point, I click, I take photo. Fantastic. But for somebody who wants a little bit more control, or any control, this presents a couple of obstacles. Film responds to an abundance of light, right? We get those really bright, brilliant pastel looking images when we overexpose the film by about a stop. Now, on a camera like this, that is not possible to do within the controls of the camera. On an SLR, it's very easy. You just kind of twist the ISO knob to reflect half of the sensitivity of the film that you actually put in the camera. But if you want to overexpose your film shots on a point and shoot, you have to be a little bit more inventive. And so a workaround that people have been doing is something called DX code hacking. So the DX code is, if you look at a roll of film, there's that metallic looking strip that kind of doesn't really make any sense when you first look at it. That is actually a code that tells the camera how sensitive your film is. And so by manipulating that code, by, you know, scratching off some of the non-conductive parts or covering up the conductive parts with nail polish or tape, you can actually trick the camera into thinking that your film is a different speed, a different sensitivity, and thus force it to overexpose or underexpose your images. That is the workaround that you have to do if you want to overexpose your images on a point and shoot, which I've done many times. I've done on pretty much every single other point and shoot that I have, except for the Contax T2. Because as we said before, it has an exposure compensation dial. And so without having to do any sort of DX code hacking, we can change our ISO, we can change our exposure on this camera with just the turn of a dial, which is usually a feature that is reserved for SLRs, larger cameras. But on here, I'm actually able to do that just by quickly ticking this dial. So what that means is instead of having to actually physically modify the film, I can just twist this knob and now everything's gonna be one stop overexposed. But if, let's say it's dusk, it's getting darker, and the camera is gonna have a hard time shooting a fast enough shutter speed to actually capture the motion without being blurry, well then I can just turn it back down, and now we can shoot a regular exposure, or we can even go underexposed. I think an excellent case study to imagine how effective this is as a tool is to think of yourself at a music festival or on an adventure with your friends. During the day, you want to shoot nice, beautiful, kind of slightly overexposed images to get those really beautiful pastel colors. And then in the evening time, it starts to get darker. And where a camera like this would just give up, you can actually just say, okay, well now we're just going to underexpose a little bit. And that feature has made this camera my go-to for concerts or music festivals, because I can shoot during the day at the exposure I want, and then in the evening, I have enough control over the camera to where I can still shoot in low light. But there's something about this camera that I don't see anybody talking about, and it is something that I think is very important, because this is gonna be up to your face every single time you shoot a photo. And so wouldn't one of the most important features about it be how it smells? So how does the Contax T2 smell? Well, like a cyan kind of blue if it were a color. Very fresh, very nice. I would give this a 9.5 out of 10. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not talk about this beautiful Carl Zeiss f2.8 lens. For a point and shoot camera, this thing shoots incredible photos. The lens on here is amazing, and I think it compares really, really well to some of my 35mm SLR photos. It just feels like it has the power and the control of a camera much larger, and it just fits in your pocket. If you want to, really all you have to do is press the shutter button. But it also gives you the ability to exercise a little bit more control if you want to. Like the ability to choose your aperture, to choose which flash mode you want, to choose your focus, to choose your exposure. It feels like Contax really thought, what would we have to put into a point and shoot to make it the kind of point and shoot a photographer would actually want in their pocket? They have included all of the features that you need to have just enough control without having so much that it bogs down the process and prevents it from being as useful and easy to use as something like this. It feels really solid. It doesn't make the same noises that Minolta did. Yes, it's the build quality. Yes, it's the fact that it's also famous, but it is also just one of the most capable film cameras that you can own, period. Like, there are definitely cameras that take better photos than this, for sure. But do they fit in your pocket? Are they as easy to use? Are you as fast on the draw with them? I don't know that you can outperform this camera by many of those metrics. This is a special, particular piece of gear. I don't think it's right for everyone, but for someone like myself, I do see the value in it. I bought it 5 years ago. I would buy it again. It's a fantastic camera. I highly recommend it. But yeah, it is very expensive. But you might be thinking, okay, all of that sounds great. It's obviously a cool camera, but it's still $1,000. I just want to document my life on film. Is there a pocket camera that can get me like 80% of the results that the Contax does for a fraction of the cost? And the answer is yes. Just as I think that the Contax is a unique offering for its price point, I think that there is a budget-friendly camera that is the perfect take anywhere, document your life kind of camera, and one that costs way less so you don't feel guilty if you don't baby it. If you want to find out more about that camera, check out this video right here.